My wife, Emily, came home and called me aside. She said she wanted to tell me a secret, and I replied that I was listening. She laughed and told her mother, Linda, that Linda wasn't feeling well but was laughing. Emily explained everything and said that Linda needed to have an active sex life. I almost choked on my tea. I drank my tea while Emily shared the news. It's the medicine, Emily continued, the pressure your mom needs to equalize. I scratched my head, trying to comprehend what was being said, and asked the idiotic question, Are you out of your mind? Emily became indignant. What does that have to do with you? Come on. Sparks flew, and I realized she was annoyed by my reaction. I told her I was joking, and the situation subsided, but the news stuck in my head, and I kept coming back to it. My mother-in-law, Linda, is a single woman who lives alone, and the last time she was with a man was 100 years ago. At least, that's what she tells me. She doesn't dress like an old lady. Sometimes, she even pulls her skirt up to her knees, so I decided to check on her. I decided to stop at the store and get some candy. I headed over to Linda's house. I knocked on the door, and she opened it, surprised that I had come. I usually only come with Emily, and even then, rarely. Do you want something to eat? Asked Linda. I nodded my head. She led me into the kitchen and sat me down at the table. She put a plate of food in front of me. I took a spoon and began to eat, furtively glancing at her. She was wearing a ridiculous robe with her legs open at the bottom. I remembered what Emily had said about the doctor, advising her to be active. I didn't know how to start a conversation, but Linda helped me. She started complaining about the doctor's visit, saying her blood pressure was too high and that she was tired of all these medications they kept prescribing. What did the doctor say? She asked me, and I just sat there with my mouth open. The answer seemed obvious. I asked her jokingly, Did he suggest anything else? Her voice shook in confusion. I repeated the question, and she exclaimed, slapping me lightly on the back of the head, I'm not that old. Then she went to the cellar and returned with a jar of my favorite cherry wine, filling a cup for me. I drank it in one gulp and licked my lips. So, am I fit for this role again? I asked, slapping her on the back, also kind of jokingly. But that was the end of the joking. Linda lunged at me, clutching her head, and I didn't hesitate to quickly finish what she had started. She looked confused, not knowing how to act, and I didn't bother her any further. I fixed my clothes and left the apartment, thanking her for the borscht and all, trying not to look each other in the eye. A few days later, I was drawn to Linda again. The doctor's recommendation kept playing in my head, and she seemed to be waiting for me. This time, she was dressed more dressy. Without thinking, I stepped toward her, and the situation quickly escalated. There was an unspoken understanding between us, and we both knew what we had come for. After that, we sat and talked. The embarrassment was almost gone. We talked about mundane things, what groceries she needed, how Emily was doing, and even a little about Linda's younger years. She talked about her youth, and I could see sparks flashing in her eyes. It was like I saw a different side of her, carefree and full of life. As I was about to leave, Linda reached for me again, and I couldn't help myself. Finally, out of breath, she said in a weak voice, Okay, that's enough for today, or I'll get dizzy. I laughed at that, but I felt dizzy myself. This was unusual for me. I usually only do this once, but it was like a hurricane. I got home, and Emily didn't know anything about it. Of course, that's why she didn't ask any questions. I remembered what the doctor had recommended and thought I had nothing to do with it. I was just following his advice. My mother-in-law seemed happier, more animated, and each day I visited her, I realized I couldn't leave her alone for long. Every day after work, I stopped by to see her. I had never experienced anything like this with other women. They were all cranky, thinking only of themselves. But Linda was different. She was attentive, caring, and seemed genuinely interested in my well-being. It was refreshing and made me want to be around her even more. One day, I was sitting at home with Emily watching TV. Out of the blue, she remarked, "Mom looks so much better these days." I didn't raise an eyebrow and asked what that had to do with me. Emily shrugged. "Well, of course it has nothing to do with you, but her blood pressure is better." I said, "That's good. Congratulations." If Emily had known who had equalized her mother's blood pressure, she wouldn't have believed it. Linda told me the same thing she felt like she was 30 again. I just smiled and said, "That's because you're following the doctor's recommendations." We both laughed. Linda's laughter was infectious, and I felt like our little secret brought a new light into her life. After a few months, the routine got a little tiresome for me. Despite being a young man, Linda's energy grew daily, and Emily couldn't understand why her mom looked so blooming. "Why should I know that?" "Ask her," I reply. I didn't know what Linda had told Emily, but Linda kept reciting cherry wine for me, and Emily didn't ask questions, and Linda didn't give away our secret, the one we kept, only between us. It became a ritual. Every time I went to Linda's house, she had a bottle of wine ready, and we ate together. Sometimes we would sit on the porch and talk about life, her dreams, and what she wanted for the future. It felt like we were building something more than an arrangement. It felt like a bond. One day, Linda suggested we go for a short walk. She said she wanted to visit a nearby park, a place she hadn't been to in years. I agreed, and we spent the afternoon walking, enjoying the fresh air and each other's company. She looked so happy, and I couldn't help but feel proud to be a part of it. We found a bench, sat down, and she rested her head on my shoulder. It was peaceful, and for a moment I forgot about everything else. Emily, the mystery, the strangeness of the situation. It was just Linda and me, enjoying a simple moment together. Back at her house, things went back to normal, but this time it was different. It was no longer just about the physical connection, but the emotional connection as well. Linda looked at me with a tenderness I hadn't noticed before, and I realized I was beginning to care deeply for her. It wasn't love, not in the romantic sense, but it was something strong, something that made me want to be there for her, to make her happy. I knew it was dangerous territory, but I couldn't help it. Over time, our encounters became more than just meeting needs. They were about comfort, an escape from the ordinariness of our lives. Linda became my confidant, someone I could talk to without pretense. She listened to me without judgment, and I responded by giving her the attention and affection she craved. It was a delicate balance, and we both knew it couldn't last forever, but for now it was enough. Every day after work, I drove to her house, and we spent those precious hours together, away from the world and its complexities. Emily continued to notice her mother's transformation, but she didn't demand answers. Maybe she didn't want to know, or maybe she believed that everything that was happening was for the best. Either way, it allowed Linda and I to continue our secret relationship without interruption. And so we continued, both of us realizing we were playing with fire, but neither of us wanting to let go of the warmth it gave.